Very good. I see. Gary Shea and John Donovan. Whether the stars are out tonight for discussion of the starry skies. So we'll take a minute or two to. Hi, Dana. We'll take a minute or two to get organized here. I'm Doug Mitchell. I have the great privilege of being the executive director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy, which means that I do whatever Jill and Emily tell me to do. I'm joined tonight by Jill and Emily, who will help us kind of navigate this, and Lee Rademaker, the Ranger Lee, is joining us from the Hudson Bay District on Glacier Park's beautiful east side tonight, and we'll be sharing some time with us. Thank you to all of you as contributors to this cause for giving of your time, talents, and treasure to help preserve Glacier National Park. And particularly tonight, we're going to celebrate where half the park happens, which is half the park happens after dark. And it's really been an exciting few years, and John and Dana Donovan have been leaders in this effort to make some major investments in creating and maintaining the park status as the first ever international dark skies designated park in the world, and to increase that through programming and personnel investments. And we couldn't be any more privileged than to have someone like Lee at the helm of the astronomy program. So it's a real treasure to have Lee being able to spend some time with us tonight. So we expect around 70 people tonight joining us, which is really great to see so many faces from around the country. I see we have Kathy Stein, who's either in at Woody's Corner or in Arizona, and the mayor of Big Fork, Margaret Notley, is with us. For those of you who don't know the joke, Big Fork is an unincorporated area, so all of us who live there are the mayor. I just saw Chris McFeely join from Chicago. It's a delight to have Chris with us tonight. And Amy Lucky, who is also a mayor of Big Fork, is with us tonight. So Lee, thank you for taking some time out of what I know is a busy schedule to be with us tonight.
Happy to be here.
So I've gotten to know Lee a little bit over the last couple of years as we have been able to launch the Dusty Star Observatory, which is really an exciting new addition to the St. Mary Visitor Center area, and to be able to install a new telescope and really see the next steps in the dark sky project happen. And so it's been really a treat to see that happen. Lee, give us a little bit of kind of background. How does a good Indiana boy make his way to Glacier National Park and to the astronomy program?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. So I came by way of Indiana, grew up in Fort Wayne, and ended up coming out to Montana to go to school at the University of Montana, studying recreation management and park interpretation. I got a minor in wildlife biology, and never knew that all of that would take me here to run the astronomy program. It kind of came in a roundabout fashion where I had the opportunity to volunteer and participate in the astronomy program here, and eventually just kept taking more and more of it on until the district interpreter for the Hudson Bay District retired, and I took it all on and became the coordinator for the program across the park.
Yeah, it's really Mark was such a kind of a guiding force, and then you're able to kind of take it at the next step. It's really interesting to think about this whole idea of programming at night, right? It's kind of counterintuitive. When you think of a park, you think of going in the daylight. Did that take some getting used to for you to kind of think about how am I going to educate at night?
Yeah, it totally is a different realm of interpretive programming. When you think about our guided hikes and campground programs that the Park Service has been doing for the better part of 100 years, those sorts of things are kind of simple. I mean, people are used to moving around in the daylight, so you don't have to worry about illuminating walkways and safety related to moving around at night. And then in getting people used to using equipment like telescopes, it might seem easy that you just look through an eyepiece, but even that takes some time and thought to describe to people how to get used to looking through a telescope. And so, you know, from the basics of safety all the way through like communicating the distances of outer space, you just have to take some time to wrap your mind around it and learn how to communicate those things, because they're foreign concepts to a lot of people.
Yeah, and the programs are super popular.
Exactly. Yeah, they're, you know, when you look at pure numbers, we've had years where we've gotten close to, I think, 20,000 people attending our astronomy events. And those astronomy events aren't just our nighttime events, but there are our solar viewing during the daytime, which, you know, you can picture some of our really busy areas of the park, people just cycling through, you know, looking through the solar scopes, and we can really contact a lot of people in those events. And so, you know, we are one of the more popular interpretive programs in the park, and we serve thousands of people during a normal year.
And not only, and again, thank you to all of you who have donated so generously to the Conservancy, and many of you specifically to the Dark Skies educational work, but we really wouldn't be able to do this work. I have to give a shout out to the Big Sky Astronomy Club, right? We wouldn't be able to do this work without them. That's a really unique partnership.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, big round of applause to them. I mean, we lean on them heavily, especially at our Logan Pass star parties. I can bring up 4 of our volunteer astronomers that are paid for through donations to the Conservancy. But when we have 500 people show up, it takes another 15 or so astronomers from the Big Sky Astronomy Club in order to even get close to meeting the demand to look through telescopes.
You know, it's one of the great things about this work. I like to call it partnership, because really it is the Big Sky Astronomy Club, it's Glacier National Park, it's the Glacier Conservancy, it's donors to the Conservancy, it's the volunteer associates, it's the Institute, that we all have this shared love of the park that can manifest itself through this partnership that really makes this work super enriching. So again, thank you for sharing some time with us. I know you have put together a little presentation, so people didn't come to hear me talk, they came to hear you. So we'll go ahead and hand it over to you, and Lee is going to share his screen, but the chat box, which is down in the middle there, is going to be available to you. So if things come up that are questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Emily and Jill are going to be helping out to curate some of those questions. We've got an hour together tonight, and Lee, again, thanks, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Doug. And again, thank you to everybody who's joined us tonight for this event. I really appreciate seeing, right now it looks like 40 or so participants in the queue, and knowing that all of you share some interest in the dark skies here in Glacier National Park. I have, every time I go out at night and see the stars in Glacier, I'm blown away. And I'm sure many of you have had that same experience, either in Glacier or another dark place. And it's just so awe-inspiring and so powerful to experience. I really do think it's something worth celebrating and worth sharing with as many of our visitors as possible. So every time you folks either donate to the park or donate to this program specifically, you're helping our visitors have that experience. And so I want to just say thank you so much for everything you've all done to help us out. And I did put together a presentation that goes through some of the history of our astronomy program and tells you a little bit about our observatory, Dusty Star Observatory. And so we'll jump right into that, and I'll hopefully it'll be kind of an entertaining story, and then I'll at the end, I'll show you some of the photos that we've taken with the observatory, both this year, but also a little bit last year. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I'll start the presentation shortly. You'll have audio of me and a small image of me up in the corner while I'm giving this presentation.
And if you need to move around, you'll have a set of tiles of people's photos that you can move around, and you can also use the minimizing tool to make that go away if it's blocking your view.
All right. Here in Glacier, we call our astronomy program Half the Park Happens After Dark. And we are actually known as Waterton Glacier International Dark Sky Park. And our dark sky program is generously supported through donations to the Glacier National Park Conservancy. We have a lot of people within the park who also help to support this program, including our volunteer astronomers who work on the west side of the park out of APGAR. We have 2 volunteers on that side, and then we have an additional set of volunteers over here on the east side, plus myself. Then, as we mentioned earlier, the Big Sky Astronomy Club also helps out with some of our bigger events, as well as jumping in to help on some of the really busy nights in APGAR when we get crowds of 70 or more on it for one of our nightly programs. So big thanks to all those folks that are involved in our program. As Doug said, my name is Lee, and my family and I live here in St. Mary on the east side of the park. My wife is an interpreter here in the park. My older son, Corbin, is almost an interpreter. He knows all the names of all the stars and planets and walks around interpreting the trails and telling us about all the different plants and animals. And our youngest son, Sylvan, he would still just kind of rather chew on a pine cone, but we're all engaged here in the park, and we're all living here and enjoying the beauty that Glacier has. One of the things that we're certainly enjoying, or at least myself, is the night sky. And the International Dark Sky designation only happened a few years ago, really, in I think 2017. But we have been working on our dark sky park programs. Half the Park Happens After Dark since about 2008. And that's when Tyler Nordgren, who did the artwork on the screen here, visited Glacier as an artist in residence. And part of his artist in residency was working on doing some artwork. So the really interesting illustration that you see in front of you is one of the pieces that he did. But the other big thing that Tyler did was he sat down with our district interpreter, Mark Wagner, and started to plan out and think about how Glacier could have an astronomy program. And really within just a year or more, a year or two, that program was up and running. And here's an image of a line of people waiting to look through a telescope at one of our Star Party events up at Logan Pass. And the first couple of years, it went from just having a telescope here or there, a couple of weeks during the summer, and has expanded. Every year we've grown by leaps and bounds until, during a Star Party event now up at Logan Pass, we may have 500, 600 people show up. And just lines and lines of people who want to look through our telescopes. And so it's really grown significantly and really amazing. Here's one of the images from one of the Star Parties up at Logan. And over there in the corner, we have a screen set up to show an orientation video, and you can just see the glowing faces across the crowd, waiting eagerly for the Milky Way to come out and for the stars to really start to shine. So they're really popular, really fun, really big events that we put on, but kind of the biggest part of our program by pure numbers is actually our solar programs during the daytime. And we have solar telescopes that we set up that filter out most of the light and allow just enough light that you can see the sun safely. And during an active solar year, you can see sunspots and solar flares and all sorts of cool stuff. And this is a great opportunity for us to market and attract people to our nightly events, which are a little bit under the radar for most people who go to bed early. We can kind of tease them and get them to latch on to the really awe-inspiring programs that we put on at night. And so we do our nightly programs. We do our those nightly programs occur both in Apgar and St. Mary, usually about 4 nights a week, and we get crowds anywhere from 15 or 20 to sometimes well over 60 or 70 on the west side. So they're very, very popular and very important to part of our designation as an international dark sky park. In order to maintain that designation, we have to actually give programs and teach people about the values of the night sky. And so we do that with our astronomy program, but we actually realized that we were kind of bumping up against a wall with our typical astronomy programs. We were having trouble with getting some groups of visitors to look through the scope successfully. We have a kind of persistent problem of wind on the east side of the park. And Mark Wagner, the district interpreter, decided that, you know, what we really needed was an observatory. And one day I was actually working down in Grand Teton during the winter, and I don't know how he did it. He tracked me down at a visitor center desk in the park and on the phone, and he told me to get on my email and check out this new observatory that he found. And this is essentially what he found in the image here. You can see a SkyShed Pod Max 12 and a half foot observatory. And it's a 12 and a half foot dome. And it comes as a kit. And the nice thing about this kit is that they do all of the really hard math and design work to try to figure out how all these pieces fit together. And it's not just the design of the structure itself, but observatories, as you can imagine, are fairly complex. They have a lot of moving parts. They have a lot of expensive equipment, and all of that stuff needs to communicate and work together and function. And all of that stuff most of that stuff is figured out by SkyShed, which was great. It took a lot of pressure off of us. Because we're more at this level of astronomy, or at least myself. I have a background in wildlife biology. And so I really needed a little bit of hand-holding to get through some of this stuff. But we also luckily have the Big Sky Astronomy Club and our volunteer astronomers that assisted with the construction of the observatory. So going back to about 2016, we were just in the process of really getting approval for building the observatory. So this is the St. Mary Visitor Center parking lot that you see in front of you, and the building kind of straight down the center of the image is the visitor center itself, with the St. Mary Valley kind of going off to the left side of your screen. And it's a beautiful wide open valley, and here we are trying to figure out where exactly we wanted to put the observatory. And I don't know if my mouse shows up on the screen, but over on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a little one-way sign, and that's the location of our observatory. It's not the best location for an observatory if you want the most pristine skies, but if you want to do outreach, if you want to reach people and make it easy for people to come to your program, this is a wonderful site. And so we started plotting and preparing that site for an observatory in the subsequent years. Our observatory is actually made of plastic mostly. If you have climbed on playground equipment in the last 20 years, or had children or grandchildren with one of these playgrounds in your backyard or in their backyard, this is approximately the same type of material. It's a high density polyethylene plastic. And the only difference between the stuff in this playground and the stuff on the observatory is its quality and thickness. So our observatory walls are double walls that are, the plastic itself is about 1/4 inch thick. They're really strong, really resilient, and this material is protected from UV and things like that, and should last for quite a long time, and is really pretty amazing how tough this stuff is. I'll get into that in just a minute. In the spring of 2018, our observatory was delivered, and it came on a series of pallets, and all these parts were kind of broken down into pieces. We had wall panels and doors and dome segments and things like that. And then, of course, we had just thousands of nuts and bolts. There was a box marked heavy, 70 pounds, and inside it were just nuts and bolts. Luckily, they were all labeled, so it didn't quite look like this mess here on the screen. But needless to say, some assembly required for this thing. But they had good instructions, and we had a good crew of people. Here's Mark Wagner in the blue jersey, Steve Jamruska in the middle, and Glenn Tarullo on the side there. And those were just a few of the volunteers that helped us put this observatory together. And so in July and August, we had the pad laid for the observatory. We began constructing the components that would make up the observatory, like this big wooden ring that serves as the kind of rotation point for the dome. So we have these big ball bearings that sit underneath that ring and on top of the walls, and that whole thing supports the roof of the observatory, so it can spin 360 degrees around. And so we had to put all these pieces together, and it's driven by a chain drive with an electric motor that engages that chain to pull it around, and uses the electric motors to very precisely control where the slot of the observatory is pointing. And if you don't know what the slot is, I'll show you in another image here. Meanwhile, partway through the summer, our telescope arrived, and it's probably the most expensive package that I've had my name on, and also probably the most exciting thing that I've ever gotten to unbox. It's a 20-inch plane wave telescope manufactured in the United States, and it's a special type of telescope. It's actually called an astrograph. And that means that it is designed specifically with photography in mind. And the design that aids in that is called a corrected Dal-Kirkham, which uses a couple of lenses in addition to the gigantic mirrors that it has to correct the image and make it really flat, so that instead of kind of the image fading out on the edge of the screen of the sensor, you end up with a really nice crisp focus all the way to the edges of the screen. And it's really wonderful for doing astrophotography and things like that. The other really cool thing about this telescope is, prior to having this thing, the biggest telescope that we had computerized, computer controlled, was a 11-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain design telescope, and it was great. Those things are amazing. They're still the kind of the main workhorse of our astronomy program, but at 11 inches, it's not great at gathering light. This 20-inch telescope is roughly 6 times more light sensitive and gathers 6 times more light than that little 11-inch scope. And I think the math is something like, for every time you double the size of, or the diameter of a telescope, you quadruple the amount of light that it gathers. And so by sizing up our scope substantially, we are able to see dimmer objects, which often represents objects that are further away. If you're an astronomy geek, the next little bits of info, the focal length will be interesting to you. If you're not, bear with me just a moment. The focal length is 135 inches, and the focal ratio is an f6.8. So it's not a really fast telescope. You can't just snap a really quick image and have it be bright and like really stunning. You have to do a little bit more work with this telescope, but it's big and it's powerful and it can do a lot. And it magnifies things about a bit over 500 times, which means we're looking at a tiny little patch of sky when we have our telescope pointed up at an object. So it's got a small field of view. which is great for a lot of objects. But like if you're trying to look at the moon or trying to look at the Andromeda Galaxy, which is even larger than the moon in apparent or in size, it is a little bit more challenging. You have to do a little bit of work. But our observatory wasn't done yet. We couldn't just drop this thing in and start playing. We had to finish building the structure, but boy, was it motivation once we saw that telescope that we wanted to get the observatory up and running. So here's a view looking down into the observatory, and each of these black bays is either a place for a computer, storage, electronics, things like that. It was kind of fun working inside the observatory as we were putting it together. People were walking into the visitor center or whatnot, and we didn't really have a sign that jumped out at you and said, this is an observatory. So instead, we heard a lot of guesswork about what it might be. A lot of people thought it was a new restroom, which I'm not gonna lie, we probably could use more restrooms in the park, but to me, it was something much more exciting and much more important than another bathroom. But that started to change as we began to put some more superstructure up on the observatory. So here we have the domes support structure going in, the ribs that hold up the panels that they're working on here in this image. And here we are with those panels being put up. And right now, the part that's open still is the slot. That's what the observatory's telescope looks through. And that those dome components spin around and give us a great view of the entire sky each night. So here's that slot again. And here we are with now the slot covers in place. And that means that we can open and close that cover, allowing us to either just maybe look at the horizon, or we can lift it all the way up past 90 degrees to look at the very top of the sky, the zenith. So now it looks like an observatory to me, but unfortunately it still looked like a radar dish or dome to a lot of our visitors. But soon enough, that would be rectified. You know, one thing about St. Mary is it's windy, and we actually, we talked a lot to the designer of this observatory, trying to figure out if he thought that it would survive the 80-mile-an-hour winds that we commonly get out here in St. Mary. And, you know, one awesome thing about observatories is they're wind tested like crazy. And especially just the bare design of these dome-shaped observatories. Think Mauna Kea, think some of the remote observatories that are placed on top of mountains all over the world. They're just beaten with some of the most intense storms, and they survive really pretty well. And our observatory experiences that wind on probably a monthly basis. We'll hit 70, 80 miles an hour, except for the middle part of the summer where we get some nice, clear, calm skies. But here's kind of an idea of what the St. Mary winds are like. I mean, you can lean back against these windstorms and be comfortable for a moment or two before the gust stops and drops you to the ground. So I apologize if this blows out your speakers, but here's a little wind noise. And down you go as that gust stops. The wind here really is intense. And when you're in the observatory during one of these windstorms, it sounds like there's a freight train roaring by. It is really impressive, but this thing holds up. And in December of, I believe it was 2018, we had John Ashley was doing some night sky photography in the park, and he swung through the St. Mary Visitor Center parking lot and took this image of our observatory. And that first year that we were preparing for winter, we did a couple of things to try to make sure that snow didn't get in there. We put a little wrap around it. We even tried to use some sort of boat shrink wrap to cover the dome. But we found out none of that works and none of it is really needed. The wind can just rip that stuff to shreds. And so we've done away with doing that. But interestingly, John Ashley took another really important photograph on that night that he was here photographing the observatory that I'll bring back in just a few minutes. So it survived the winter, and that meant in the spring, we could start installing some of the components that make the observatory work. So here you have the computer control that actually controls the slot cover opening and closing, the dome rotating around. And then we've got the motor up there in the corner. That's the big black thing. And then these paddles that are kind of up on the top right edge of the screen, those are what send voltage to a set of batteries that control the motor that's up on the slot cover. So this big red motor on the left-hand side is battery operated and remotely controlled by that other computer, that CRM114. And then on the other side of the screen here, you see the telescope pier and the mount. And all this was being installed in the spring. As soon as we got that mount installed, we had the joy and really nervous moment of connecting the 20-inch telescope to the pier and to the mount. And as we slid that thing on there, all 140 pounds of it, and started to tighten everything in place, I just couldn't help it. In my mind, I'm just seeing that telescope crash to the ground, but it didn't. It stayed up, and it has stayed up since. It's a wonderful telescope that has been treating us well since we installed it. And shortly after installing it, we did get the opportunity to do some test driving in the spring of 2019. So here it is, just all the different components that moving. And so that's the telescope can rotate and tilt, the slot cover can open and close, and the dome ring can spin around. And it kind of sounds like you're in a ship when that thing's moving. You get this kind of creaking sound as the observatory spins and rotates. But here is what it ended up looking like by kind of early summer of 2019. Those big black boxes that are on the outside of the observatory, those are actually big 55-inch monitors. We don't have the public actually come inside the observatory because we are projecting the images of the different objects that we're seeing to these exterior monitors. Having people look through an eyepiece on a telescope is fun. We still have that component as part of our program using a telescope that sits outside the observatory, but the observatory is kind of a tricky place to navigate. And we wanted to give people who may have trouble looking through an eyepiece or getting up to a telescope. Imagine if you're a small child or in a wheelchair, a telescope is a really difficult thing to actually to use. And so this gives those people a great opportunity to enjoy the night sky in much the same way that enable a person without any problems would have. So here's the observatory, and we got it working shortly after that. We got the camera attached, and one of the first things that we looked at was a really cool planetary nebula. And it's a planetary nebula that we often look at. It's called the Ring Nebula, with our nightly kind of everyday workhorse telescopes that we use with our typical programs. And with our typical programs, this nebula is really, really, really nebulous. I mean, it's just this little kind of fuzzy looking spot. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of color. But really, it's hard to really appreciate the full brilliance of it until we did this very first exposure, or one of the very first exposures that we took, and we overexposed it by a mile. We really underappreciated how much light this telescope could capture. But the cool thing is if you look right in the middle of that bright circle, there's a star, and that star is the star that started that nebula. It was started out looking like a star like ours, and then as it aged and as it reached the end of its life, that outside layer of the star just puffed off into space, and then the core of that kind of dying star emitted a whole bunch of ultraviolet radiation that just lit up that gas like a big neon sign in space. So this planetary nebula is I think of like 1,200 light years away. It's not that far as distant objects go, but it's a really beautiful thing to see with the big telescope. Here's another one of my favorites. This is the Dumbbell Nebula, or as really clearly demonstrated in this first image that we took of it, the Apple Core Nebula. Really fits when you expose it like this, as the Apple Core Nebula. And then another really early attempt at capturing a globular cluster. And these globular clusters kind of hang out around the fringe of the Milky Way, and they're in other galaxies too, but they're just these dense little pockets of stars. And each one of those stars is as close or closer than we are to our nearest neighboring star. And that means that their night sky is, well, I say their night sky, like I know there are aliens there, but the night sky on a planet that's circling one of those stars must just be incredible, with just brilliant stars all around. And these are the sort of things that we can really get into and talk about as we're standing around the observatory, thinking about kind of what it might be like to be there or see that up close. And those aren't really things that you can experience when somebody's squinting and fighting to look through that eyepiece for a minute before the crowd behind them kind of bumps them and pushes them out of the way. This is something that we can really get people excited and interested in. And these first few images were just exhilarating to see, and we'll see some more in a little bit. But by September, we were prepared to actually launch this observatory, and we called it our launch party because I think it really does fit with the spirit of what this observatory is aimed at achieving. The folks who designed it, SkyShed, actually have a hope of putting these observatories all across the country and around the world, so that there are public outreach opportunities for people all over the place. If we want to solve the problem of light pollution, it's not going to be by people knowing that they can see the dark sky in Glacier, but not in their own backyard. They need to be able to make that connection to their own skies. And so I think that's part of the idea behind this Starship project that SkyShed is attempting to do. But it could also mean that if it's cloudy here in Glacier and we have a crowd of people who want to see something, we can dial up our friends in, say, Australia during the day, and we can show them the night sky in the Southern Hemisphere. And so we have that hope that they're going to be moving that direction. We are among some of the first of these observatories to go in and start being used for public outreach. The other thing that we're aiming for is to contribute to Glacier's distance education program. We have a really popular education program here in the park, and in the last couple of years, we've started implementing some of the curriculum, some astronomy-based curriculum that in the future, now that we have the observatory up and running, will include field trips and class trips for those schools that are nearby us to the observatory. And then also last year, we started to do, actually it was even this spring, we started to do some kind of sending some of the images that we've taken in the observatory to classrooms, and allowed them and given them the opportunity to use those in some of their classes. And then something else that I'm really excited about is that we have been able to purchase a spectrograph. And a spectrograph is a scientific instrument that astronomers can use to look at the very minute pieces of light that come out of a single star, and you can graph that light and tell what sort of elements are making up that star and what sort of reactions and things are going on in that star. There's actually a huge demand for this data. And with our new spectrograph and cameras that we are getting, we'll be able to start working on being able to fulfill some of those data needs and contribute to real science. National parks are kind of laboratories for discovery, and we are hoping that our Dusty Star Observatory can kind of maintain that tradition. Really quickly, I want to show you a quick little tour of the observatory. If you haven't seen it or haven't been to the St. Mary area, here is a brief little overview, and this will take about 4 minutes.
Glacier National Park's Dusty Star Observatory is near the St. Mary Visitor Center on the east side of Glacier National Park. It is primarily a public outreach observatory and is easily accessible to visitors, and most importantly, has great dark skies. Using camera-assisted observing to display live video of what the telescope sees, this is what visitors see on the observatory's external monitor. Jupiter from over 450 million miles away. The Dumbbell Nebula, which is over 1,000 light years away. And the Whirlpool Galaxy, which is 26 million light years away. The observatory is a 12.5-foot PodMax observatory manufactured by SkyShed. The observatory and nearly all the equipment inside was purchased using money donated to the Glacier National Park Conservancy. Astronomy volunteers and a handful of park employees began building the observatory in 2018 and began testing equipment and doing public demonstrations during the summer of 2019. And it was officially launched in September of 2019. The heart of every observatory is the telescope. We have a 20-inch plane wave CDK, or corrected Dal-Kirkham astrograph. This means it has a 20-inch primary mirror and is designed to be used with a camera. The telescope is moved by a Paramount ME2 robotic telescope mount. All 400 pounds of the telescope mount and counterbalance sits on top of a very heavy-duty pier located in the center of the observatory. We lovingly call this the Donovan Pier because it does support the bulk of our astronomy program. Instead of an eyepiece on the back end of the telescope, we have a Malicam DS16C color video camera shown in blue. The red piece of equipment is a rotator and focuser, which gives a very fine level of control to the camera's focus. The dome slot cover is powered and can open just enough to see the horizon or well past 90 degrees to observe stars and other objects at the zenith or the highest point in the sky. The dome's roof rotates 360 degrees and gives us a great view of the sky from horizon to horizon. We're still learning a lot about this equipment. For instance, the day that I did this video, I discovered that we can actually see Venus in broad daylight through clouds and even smoke. I was so surprised to see this that I forgot to clean up my desk. You can see my coffee and a banana over there. But right there is Venus in broad daylight. We can do a lot with this telescope, even if the night sky isn't with us. Right up there along the edge of the clouds is where Venus was. Not ideal viewing conditions. But on an ideal night, this is what we might see of Jupiter. Lots of detail, lots of color, very, very beautiful. For those of us who struggle to look through an eyepiece of a typical telescope, Dusty Star Observatory will bring color and clarity to distant objects like the Dumbbell Nebula or the Whirlpool Galaxy. All of that will be shown on external monitors on the outside of the observatory. So it kind of nicely bookends what people can experience by looking up and seeing the full grandeur of Glacier's dark skies. The big picture balanced with the minute detail picked up by our cameras in the Dusty Star Observatory.
All right, so the Dusty Star Observatory is fantastic, but we actually got all the way through building this thing without really knowing what we were going to call it. And you know, when you look at how observatories are named, they're often named after beneficiaries, or they're named after the specific instrument that's in the observatory. And we wanted to do something a little bit different. And so we were looking hard and trying to think of a way to connect this observatory to the stories of the Blackfeet people, the people who are part of Glacier's present, past, history, and future. They are the people of this park. And we wanted to make sure that our observatory connected to the stories that they have been sharing about the night sky. That's a big component of our nightly program that we do. It's not just about the Greek constellations, the Greek constellations. It's about the Blackfeet stories and the Blackfeet constellations that we can connect to. And so we looked around for a way to do that. And it was really just almost pure luck that we found something that had such a powerful connection to all these things. So Dusty Star is a really important figure and term in Blackfeet. So all the way at the very back end of the valley, the St. Mary Valley, is a mountain called Dusty Star. And that mountain is part of Citadel Mountain, a much larger mountain, and it kind of sits near Wild Goose Island. If you ever stop at Wild Goose Island and look across and see a big cliffy mountain, that's Dusty Star. And Dusty Star is the term in Blackfeet. It actually means meteor or comet or falling star. It also refers to puffball mushrooms, which in the traditional knowledge of the Blackfeet, puffball mushrooms are where a falling star met the ground and touched the ground. And so they're important both culturally, they're important medicinally, and they are an important reminder of the connection between Earth and the sky and the stories that the sky helps to tell and share. And so we were really excited to see that connection. And that connection actually goes a little bit further in a really kind of interesting way. And when I was showing you that image of that John Ashley took with the star trails kind of behind the observatory, that image was taken in December. He drove back into the park as far as he could, and then he hiked quite a ways into the park. And he also took this image right here. Sorry for the reflection. So this image shows a meteor streaking over St. Mary Lake with Dusty Star Mountain right here. And there's actually even a comet right over here. And then just a little while after taking this picture, John went by and took a picture of the yet unnamed observatory. And I just thought that was just such a cool coincidence earlier today when I realized that actually happened that same night. That was just such a cool little coincidence. But the coincidence doesn't end there, but because Dusty Star in the realm of science is also something that exists. And dusty stars are stars that are kind of enshrouded by dust and gas. You can't really observe them with a normal telescope. They're hidden from view, and they really are kind of mysterious. And to me, that's what our astronomy program is kind of about. It's about mystery and discovery and making these distant objects visible and approachable and real to our visitors. The night sky is certainly grand. You can enjoy it just by sitting and looking up at the night sky, but to be engaged in the mystery and be engaged in the discovery process, I think makes it more real and makes it more powerful and potent. And so that helps to kind of balance this cultural connection of the stories of the night sky with this deeper scientific understanding. And so that really fits our goals and really, really worked well for naming the observatory. We unfortunately haven't had a whole lot of opportunities to interact with visitors in St. Mary this year. The east side of the park has been closed to visitors. And so I have been working on a number of projects and improvements around the observatory, making manuals and other really, really fun things like that. But I've also taken the opportunity to fire up the telescope and get the camera going and learn a little bit more about how to use it. So now I want to share with you some of the images of things that I've been able to see this summer through our telescope. And I'll actually mention here that the camera that we have is designed for outreach. It's not designed to capture the sharpest images. It's designed to capture images quickly. And so while a normal astrophotography camera will require lots and lots of exposures stacked over one another and processing and work to create an image, ours is nearly instantaneous. The trade-off there is that stacked processed image is sharp and really, really perfectly exposed. And ours maybe isn't so sharp looking or isn't so perfect, but I think they're pretty good. And let me show you a few of them. Obviously, something you all probably recognize. The moon is actually too big for us to really easily see with our telescope. Our telescope chops it up a little bit. And so this is actually a composite image of 6 different images that are stitched together. Mars is close to its closest approach that it will make, and right now it's pretty low on the horizon for us, but even through the thick haze of the low horizon sky, we're able to see some definition in Mars, like close to what you might consider to be the equator. There's kind of a dark stripe, and up close to the top there's kind of a lighter patch, and that could be interpreted as the polar cap on Mars. If once we kind of upgrade our camera equipment, we'll be able to do some longer exposures or more kind of higher quality stacked exposures, but that won't be for our public outreach. That'll just be for presentations like this and other distance education type stuff. You all remember probably seeing or hearing about NEOWISE. Well, the day that I went out to look at NEOWISE was actually the first day that I had the observatory up and running. We had had some foul weather in the spring, and I didn't even have time to focus the telescope. I just turned it on and pointed it in the direction of NEOWISE, and boom, right there was this bright glowing green coma on the front end of the comet, and then the tail stretched far off the edge of the view. But it was really astounding to see, and darn, I wish I had got it in focus. But it was still pretty rewarding to see that thing up close and see the glowing nucleus of that comet. This is an object, Alberio, that we commonly look at with our typical nightly scopes. Alberio is a double star system, and the cool thing about the double star Alberio is that you're looking at 2 very different colored stars, and they really jump out at you even on a normal telescope. But with this one, it just screams that they're different. And this is an object that we might be able to point our spectrograph at and help to illustrate why exactly these stars look so different. I spoke about a globular cluster earlier. Here's a later attempt at one of those globular clusters. So we've improved the quality of the image a little bit. And if you kind of like squint your eyes a little bit and look at it sideways, you can imagine it looks like somebody spilled like diamond dust on black velvet or something like that. It really is beautiful, and it's on looking through the scope as well as in person on the observatory's monitors. It really is amazing to see all those stars packed into this tiny little cloud almost. Saturn is one object that I look at nightly. Being again low on the horizon means that it's in these really quick exposures. It's not that crystal clear sharp, but you can see the rings, you can see the definition. But it's also other objects that we can see are much more distant. Bode's galaxy or M81. This is without any sort of processing. This is just a live image that we captured just on a whim almost. And you can see the definition in that spiral galaxy. And with our upgraded cameras that we hope to include in future years, we'll be able to spend some more time on objects like this and really create a bigger catalog of really quality images. This is from the launch party. This is the Whirlpool Galaxy. And Whirlpool Galaxy is passing by a smaller galaxy and interacting just barely as they do so. And we don't know for sure if they're going to collide, but they're certainly kind of interacting as they move past each other. Really beautiful. One of my favorite things to look at is the Dumbbell Nebula. Just the color and definition in that thing makes it look like you can just reach out and touch it on the through the telescope. But again, this object is 1,000 light years away, or over 1,000 light years away. And the Ring Nebula, another one of my favorites, with that core star glowing away and kind of creating that glowing effect on the nebulous material that's blowing off the star. Really astounding to see. And these are the sort of things that our visitors can see during our nightly programs now. And they aren't just this frustrating, like little blurry spot through the eyepiece. They're in full color. They're right in front of their faces to enjoy. And with that, I just want to say thank you again to everybody that's donated. Thank you to the Conservancy, to our volunteers with the National Park Service, to my coworkers who have helped with this program, and again to the Big Sky Astronomy Club. This project to build the observatory culminates a lot of work since 2009 to build something that really helps people connect deeply to the night sky. And I think we've done that in a really great way with our observatory. And I think we're a model for a lot of parks who are looking to create meaningful dark sky connections and well appreciated dark sky parks. And so I hope that people will take our model and run with it, and we can create successes other places. If you have any questions after this program, you can get in touch with the Conservancy and they can reach out to me, or on the screen here is my contact information. My first name, Lee, _ last name at National Park Service, nps.gov, and my office phone number here too. If you have any questions, I'm here. And it looks like we do possibly have some questions that we can kind of open the door to in just a moment here. And we can see if I know the answer to them.
Very rare for me to mute myself, but Lee, amazing. Thank you for kind of pulling back the curtain and giving us an insider's view of the observatory, the Dark Skies program, and some very cool pictures. We are looking very forward to continuing a robust relationship with you guys. Thanks to donor support, we have an $81,000 Dark Skies project for 2021 that's on the books. We've funded a bunch of that. We're still $39,315, not that I'm counting, away from fully funding that piece of work. But I know we'll get there because people really care about this. So that's really exciting to be able to have that kind of a dramatic program in the park. We're also, many of you also may be involved in the Glacier Book Club. I am delighted to be able to say that The End of Night, which Lee also has on his bookshelf, is going to be our January book. We're going to celebrate the first new moon of 2021 with Paul Bogart, the author. So if you haven't joined up at the free to join Glacier Book Club, that's going to be our first book next year. It's available at glacier.org, of course. And Jill, I do think we had a couple of questions. I've typed in some answers a little bit, but if you want to curate a couple of questions, we can keep you a few minutes late here, Lee, that'd be great.
That's fine with me.
Great. Yeah, we had a few great questions coming in. Justin had a good one, and Lee, you kind of touched on the International Dark Sky Association earlier in your chat. Dustin asked, what are the requirements to achieve a dark sky designation? And did Glacier have to make any modifications to achieve this designation?
Yeah, great question. So there are definitely some requirements to be a dark sky park. You have to have dark skies to begin with. And there are some very specific things that they're looking for. They want to be able to see the Milky Way is kind of the easiest measurement, but there are some other characteristics that they want to see. They want to see some sort of astronomy program or astronomy education program, or some way that we are trying to encourage people to support the concept of dark sky protections. And so we had both of those components. The one thing that we needed to do in Glacier was to begin the process of understanding the amount of light that we are putting out. And so that took place really early in the process of becoming an International Dark Sky Park. We did a lighting inventory, and once we identified kind of the worst offending lights, we began the process of replacing those lights. The Conservancy helped out tremendously in helping us purchase lights to either retrofit buildings or to just simply replace offending lights. And so when we were given International Dark Sky status, it was not kind of the like, you're done, here you go be a dark sky park. It was, we still had some things that we had to fix. And so beginning, I think a couple of years ago, we started the process of replacing those lights, and we're still actually replacing a number of those. Even this last week, we were replacing lights in the headquarters area. And we will continue to work on replacing and fixing lights until I think our goal is to have everything wrapped up by like 2024 or somewhere down the road there. And at that point, we'll have kind of full protection of our night sky. And really at that point, it's starting to look out of our park borders and seeing what else we can do there, working with our partners. But the International Dark Sky Association has a really wonderful website that has great guidance on what it takes to become an International Dark Sky Park, and also what you can do in your own backyard, in your own community, to make your community more dark sky friendly. And so, look out on your back porch tonight, and if you've got a light that's casting shadows all the way across your yard or up into the sky, you have a way to control that, and you can help protect the dark skies wherever you are.
Yeah, speaking to that too, it was so cool. I felt so lucky to be able to see Comet NEOWISE earlier this year, just from in town here in Whitefish. It was just so mind-blowing. We just looked out the window and it was so cool to see. So yeah, that's great advice. If we have time for one more question, Doug.
Yeah.
Gary had a good question, kind of looking beyond Glacier. He asked, are there other dark sky programs at US or Canadian parks that you know of? And if so, are programs similar to what you're offering here in Glacier?
Yeah, we'll start out close with our partners. Waterton Lakes National Park in Canada, just across the border, has an astronomy program. And they actually set up telescopes at our Star Party events. We go up to their Star Party events. Those are on a typical year, they've kind of been later in September or so. But they do other events throughout the year. They do solar viewing during the summer. So they do star party events, and they do astronomy programs in support of their status as an international dark sky park. Yellowstone has some programs that are put on by an outside organization. They don't have their own astronomy program, at last I heard at least. Bryce in Utah has a phenomenal program. They kind of led the way in doing dark sky programs. Really a lot of parks are doing it. Cedar Breaks, just near Bryce, has a really nice program. Let's see, Chaco Canyon is probably one of the oldest dark sky programs in the Park Service. They're really becoming very, very popular in a huge variety of parks. So if you're going to a place with dark skies, there's a decent chance that there's some sort of component within their programming that you can enjoy.
Cool. And we also just got a couple questions I just wanted to make sure I touched on about the Blackfeet. Someone asked if you could recommend any books about astronomy based on the Blackfeet culture.
I don't have anything specific to the Blackfeet culture. I do have a couple of resources that we often refer to for more general stories about the night sky from a Native American perspective. But we have the luxury of having some of our Native America Speaks presenters working with us, and we rely on them to share those stories with us. And so we kind of luck out in that aspect. But you can find resources just looking online or at a library, and find resources on Native American stories about the night sky. And they're not well documented, but there are a lot of them that you can kind of find the more generalized stories.
Cool. Yeah, Wendy was wondering, I think she's asking the backdrop on your presentation with the astronomy figures. She was wondering if those were Blackfeet figures, and if so, if you knew any of the names of their constellations.
No, on the backdrop of my presentation, those were not. But the Blackfeet stories that we kind of commonly talk about are that they have two constellations that they use on their lodges or their teepees are the Pleiades and the Big Dipper, which is the seven brothers and sisters, and the Lost Children are those two constellations. And we don't necessarily tell the full stories of those constellations, but we can refer to them by name during our programs and tell some of the connections. And I think both of those stories, if you actually do a web search, you can find some of the background to those stories. They're pretty neat. It's a much different perspective on the night sky than kind of the classic Greek mythology, Zeus and all of that you grow up hearing.
Yeah, cool. And we also just had a few other comments as we were talking about other events in other places around the country. A couple people said Mesa Verde has some periodic events. Someone also commented about Lassen National Park has an annual Dark Sky Festival, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, Grand Canyon just did they did a big virtual star party this year, which was great to see.
Cool. And then Margaret also commented, Arizona State School of Earth and Space Exploration is having an online event for their Earth and Space Exploration Day on this Saturday from 10 to 1. So
great.
Also kind of
highly recommend their programming. They do something every 2 weeks and really superb educational outreach there.
Okay.
Cool. Awesome.
Well,
I think we got through most of the questions. If anyone else had a quick question, you could leave it in the chat, or Lee also very generously left his email up. So thanks for doing that, Lee.
You might also see going throughout the park a couple of newly wrapped trailers, Lee. I think those arrived this year.
Yeah, I didn't get to share an image of that, but the Conservancy worked with us to design and pay for these really spectacular wraps for our mobile astronomy trailers. So when we take all of our equipment over to the west side, we, rather than hauling it out from a building somewhere, we store it in these trailers. And now, like, I really think people are going to mistake them for pieces of art sitting in the parking lot. They're beautiful. But yeah, they help people connect to our astronomy program. And if you get a chance to see them parked in Apgar or St. Mary, I won't judge you if I see you taking pictures and you know, selfies in front of them. They're cool.
Well, one of the great things about this job is being able to meet people like Lee. Lee, thank you for the passion and professionalism that you bring to this work. It's infectious, and it makes a big difference to visitors from around the country and across the world. So, and thank you for sharing this special evening with us. It's really a treasure, and we will look forward to seeing you hopefully on the east side of the park in person next year.
Definitely.
So, and thanks to everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.